This is an incredible audience. Thank you so much for being here to share this soggy evening together, to support the arts, our community of artists, and especially to help welcome printmaker Brian Cohen and poet Chard DeNiord. Artists seek a balance between clarity and chaos, and on a good day we may find beauty somewhere within that balance, or at least a sense of equilibrium, good enough to share as a painting or a poem. I think it's iffy stuff, and it seems that the good pieces stay mysterious. So every once in a while, we're fortunate enough to introduce artists from separate disciplines, and as they collaborate, I'm struck by several things. That one and one make much more than two. The certainty that truth lies within their conjoined efforts. The inherent beauty of the combined product is definitely enhanced, and that the mystery remains and is intensified. So that's something that I haven't quite figured out. I hope Brian and Chard can help me. It's a pleasure to welcome them both. Thank you all for being here. Chard DeNiord, Brian Cohen, and welcome. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Jim. I must say I'm overwhelmed, and as I see each of you, it comes back to me how dear you've been to me for so many years, and it really, this is the second time I've been back in 3 years. I moved to Maine at that time, and it's just wonderful to be back here and among you. And I want to thank you for wearing your masks. I've been forbidden from getting a respiratory ailment, so it may make it more difficult for you to hear me, but I will make the effort. I won't speak a lot. I want to give you a general overview of what I've done, especially the collaborations that Chard DeNiord and I have had for over 3 decades at this point. Before I start, I want to acknowledge Petey and Jim and the wonderful job that they did installing this show. I walked in. It was sort of like walking inside my head the first time I saw it, and it was quite a wonderful experience. I hadn't had that kind of overview, that comprehensive survey of my work ever, and they did a magnificent job the way they curated the show and the way they installed it, really quite brilliant. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. What I'm hoping is that we'll have a conversation. I know my voice will give out before long, but I really want to have it back and forth. So there won't be a question and answer session later. I want that to be interspersed. It doesn't even have to be a question. Your responses, your thoughts, of course your questions about anything that I've done. The show represents about 35 years of my work. I grew up in an artistic household. I feel in some ways I didn't have a choice, that it was inevitable that I would be an artist. Both parents were. My father still is. He's an aviation artist, and you'll see his influence, my interest in transportation in particular. But I was primarily involved in painting and drawing. I was also a very good student, and that created a conflict for me at the time, because a friend of mine is here. We go back to junior high school, and we were reminiscing about that. But it was really very difficult to be a good student, interested in the world and in reading, and to be involved in art. Why they should be exclusive, I don't know, but they kind of were, and there was no educational path. So I actually went an academic route while never giving up my art, but focused primarily on painting and drawing. And I didn't discover printmaking until I came to teach at the Putney School in 1985. I had a course in college. I didn't remember a thing. I had to teach it, and I had to figure it out anew, and it was a pretty flat learning curve. And I have to say, a number of my students were miseducated by me. I need to apologize to them before I figured out really what was going on. But as I figured it out, I fell in love with the process. And for me, printmaking was attached to a very particular history and particular themes and attitudes that were really quite separate from the history of art as it's usually taught. And I just bought into that, and I wanted to be part of that club, and I still do. And so for the past 35 years or so, I've made prints primarily. And over the past year, I have always kept my place. And I had them, and they were in various states of decay and tarnishing, and I've returned them to some condition. In some cases, I printed second editions. In other cases, the images were damaged, and I reworked them. In some plates, I never liked them that much, and I got a second chance at them. So I spent the past year doing that, and I've just recently decided to sort of put printmaking away and get back to painting and drawing, which is where I started. So that's what I'm doing now, and it's very open-ended for me. You'll notice that my work in prints is thematic, and the show is curated to represent that. And many of those themes took the form of artist books. They were visual books that I did. I think I did 14 of them, and a number of broadsides. And they associate in parallel text, much of which were poems by Chard, DeNiord, and images. And they were in some form of housing or binding, so there's an object. PD and Jim have displayed, I think, 4 or 5 of the books. They have to be looked at fairly carefully, so if you don't mind just asking them to look through them. But they are here. And much of the work represented on the walls are selections from those artist books that I've done over the years. I'd like to move roughly chronologically, which fortunately parallels the display here. But if you look into this corner, these 4 images, I believe, behind the monitor, I started out, my first artist book was Dante's Inferno, which was kind of an ambitious opening book. And I started it after having read some excerpts from the Inferno. I managed to escape reading it during my formal education and picked it up. In fact, I had intended to learn Italian at the time, and there was a wonderful Italian teacher at the Putney School, and she sat down. We'd got through the first canto or so. I don't even think we got that far. But it was quite an undertaking. And I didn't know, it's a very long poem, as you know, and I couldn't realistically expect to reprint the whole thing. And at that point, he kind of saved me in this project. I met Chard, DeNiord. He came to teach at Putney, and he gave a talk and a reading, and we kind of connected afterward, and he said, hey, what are you up to? And I told him. And he has a divinity degree. He knew the Inferno quite well, much better than I did. And we decided to collaborate on that project. So it gave him a little room from Dante. So he was writing his own poems, largely in response to my images. I had a head start on the project. So I was about a year ahead. I had already begun all the images. There were 13 etchings in that book. And Chard wrote 13 poems to parallel the work that I had done. Now, what we'd like to do is Chard would read some of the poems that relate to the images as we walk through the exhibit. So, yeah. He needs no introduction. So.
No. Yeah. Well, I will say that I'm just so grateful that I did meet Brian in 1989, and that he challenged me to write poems about the Inferno, which was probably the most daunting proposal that I had ever experienced. I said, well, Brian, it's already been written, and Dante did a pretty good job. But he said, well, excuse me, I've made some prints here. And before I go any further, I just want to say that Brian's told you a little bit about his history as a printmaker. After working with Brian for 33 years now, and traveling around the Northeast and the East part with him a lot to show these prints, I can't think of a better printmaker than Brian Cohen in the country. And his work is on the West Coast, it's on the East Coast, and it's each project that he undertakes is really just breathtaking. And so I've felt honored for 33 years to work with him and to feel challenged by him to write poems off of his prints, sort of ekphrastic poems. Not sort of, they are. So I started writing these poems, and the first one is titled Acheron, which is the is a lake in the underworld. It's also the god of the underworld, and sometimes he's confused with Charon, who ferried souls across the river Styx. So I'll read the poem, and then Brian can talk a little bit more about the prints. And I just also, before I read, I just want to thank Petey and Jim, too. I mean, this is just a kind of a dream come true to see all of these prints up and to be reading some of these poems about them. Thank you, Petey and Jim. Acheron. I arrived at the bank to find you already there on the opposite side. Before I go any further, you all know about the river Styx, that it's the river of forgetfulness. When someone dies, they cross the river of Styx. Charon or Karen ferries them across the river to the other side, which is the other world. And so that's the story behind the river Styx. Acheron. I arrived at the bank to find you already there on the opposite side, failing at names for the sullen flow. I lay beside the willows with a violent passion, but kept it to myself, grew quickly older. Years were days. You stared at the passing mirror, mesmerized, then dipped your hair beneath the surface. The older man beside you said, "This is the end of beauty. I am the same," you cried. "The water has changed. The water has moved," he said, "and you have died. I saw your fear become desire on the other side." You sang a song about a mountain range and uncut grass and spider web across the void you called your path. We cast for fish with shining lines and spoke like friends about the weather, still the same. You caught a trout and threw him back for lack of hunger. Their bites were frequent there, despite the days our lines were lingered. I was abused by the ferryman for being alive and fell like lightning across the river. I was a leaf inside the thunder.
Thank you. That is the print again behind the monitor. I've always, until I moved to Maine, I've always lived right around the Connecticut River, and it's been a touchstone. So Chard mentioned that the river Acheron is the river between this world and the next, and the Connecticut is the river between Vermont and New Hampshire. So, and then I moved to New Hampshire. So I just keep going east. Did you want to read another, or shall I move on?
Sure, if you want to talk also maybe about the print that...
Well, I was going to move on, but...
Okay, however you want to... Song of
whatever.
Defenestration, which is, let's see.
I kind of forget what's over there. Excuse me a second. So, why don't you read one more from that series?
All right.
There's a castle and a broken bridge.
I don't have to read them
Yeah.
in order at all. I'm going to read the Adam and Eve poem, which is...
We're going to get to that.
Later.
So hold
Yeah,
on to
I'll
that.
hold
Why
on
don't
to
I
that.
go ahead?
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, do that. So this is a dark book, the Inferno. I mean, it ends up happily in paradise, of course, after purgatory. But so it was a challenge to spend some time in hell and write these poems. Plain of Tombs.
That is there. That's around the corner. Yeah.
These are the heretics who lie to, as you know, Dante had a level for each sin. So there were the heretics, there were the killers, there were the adulterers, and so forth at various levels until you got to the very bottom of hell, which is where Cocytus was, and those who had sinned most egregiously. But this is Plain of Tombs. These are the heretics who lie together in open caskets, like by like, ignited by eternal flames that burn the thoughts of wrong belief. At least they thought, you say. But now their cries declare that thought is real, and flesh survives in death like anthracite to witness to the mind's surmise. What did they think? That damned their souls, so carnal after all, that something is impossible with God? That's it.
Thank you. The Inferno is probably, except for the Bible, the most depicted text in all of Western art. So it seems that each generation, a number of artists pick up on it. And My take was just to leave all the people out of it and create settings that paralleled somewhat metaphorically for those states of mind, those psychic states. One discovery I made is that hell is not hot, it's cold, which made a lot of sense to me. So, yes, so when once you get down there, well, none of you will ever see it, but each of these books takes a couple years. I think I've done 14. And as I'm working on a book, usually some motif, some aspect of what I'm doing will suggest the next book. And there were a couple bridges that appeared in the Inferno and rivers, and they led to the next book, which is about the Connecticut River, which I think we have an example of here and that Petey and Jim can show you later. It was a folding book. It actually is 17 feet long, and it was sort of like a travelogue of again, based on the Connecticut, but an anonymous river, and Chard wrote for that as well. Do you want to read from that, or should we keep going?
I could read one more from here. And then
well, no, we're on. We're on to the next one.
Oh, okay.
Pay attention. Okay. So,
I was distracted.
Yeah. Okay.
As you know.
Did you want to read the river poem?
Did you want me to? The river under the bridge?
That's where we are.
Okay.
Not the river under the bridge.
Okay.
No.
Oh, sorry. Let me just turn my phone off here. This is a river under the bridge. The famous river has ceased to flow, now moot with souls that rise for only the memory of breath. I can imagine the pitch and rotten air. I can imagine the devils along the shore, armed with gaffs and powerful legs. I can imagine this constant night beneath the pilings where litter bobs and trawlers pass and sex descends into the rock, where the gulls cry out the single name of every virgin. The clock expires in this miasma. You know the time from passing by. Imagine now remaining here because you would not leave the swill for home, because you would not see the ants through darkness, because you wished to hear the harlot scream, because you would not retrieve your lamb from the well, because you would not turn from Moloch, because you would not leave the funeral, because you would not enter the vineyard at 4. Those are all lines taken from parables. Yeah.
At this point, and you're all too polite to raise your voices, are there any responses, questions, thoughts? I do want to just pause for you to. Okay, I'll keep going.
I have a question.
Yeah.
The last poem about the Connecticut or about the Inferno?
Well, never mind.
Okay.
That was more.
I was trying to move ahead, but he wasn't going with me. Yeah.
No, I'm going.
Okay.
Well, it felt like Inferno.
It was the Inferno, yes. You want to hear that again?
No. Let's keep going.
I'll leave it out for you.
Okay. Yeah. So,
I'm following Brian.
yeah. The Inferno had rivers, it had bridges, and the next 2 books I did were based on rivers. Did you want to read from that book?
Yeah, well, we can read river.
Okay.
Yeah. This is a beautiful book.
They all are.
So this is what it looks like here.
I don't know that she's here, and many of you probably know her, but Linda Lemke of Green River Bindery, we worked together for really almost all of the books I did, and she was just a wonderful collaborator. She would take some of my ideas, often very impractical, and she managed to engineer them with paper and board, which is a remarkable achievement. So this book unfolds, and it's, I have shown it on a shelf before, but to give you an idea of what they look like.
So it's in,
Do you want me to hold that so you can read it?
That would be great. Okay. Oh, so it's in just 3 sections, I believe, 3 or 4. This is the first section about the river. This silver script scrawls a line of final sense, signs its namelessness on stone and surges home within us, tells the time to time, then drowns. A chorus sings in waves, Take this salt and swim, both lose and find yourself where the self begins with emptiness that turns to form. And so,
No,
you want to show that?
just, that's,
Okay, the next one. Two, we launch our pews at dawn and float like leaves away from the bridge, kneel like slaves of sky. Safety mimics prayer. We pray, therefore, for current's danger, standing up. The deacon paddles while the shaman fends for fish. Our drinks of breath are stained with death, but who can hear? You want to show any of these? These are so beautiful. I hope you get a chance to see them. We'll put the book up here. 3. The light descends to surface now with recognition. This is my daughter who shears on earth, who married mass to form this water, left her father to make her bed in the difficulty of mountains, plains, and woods, who whines instead of pierces now to prove her faith, forsakes the right of heaven.
thanks, Chard.
That's it. Thank you.
I grew up in industrial Philadelphia in the 1960s, and it was sort of a dying town. It's since come back to a certain extent. But so much of the industrial construction of that place and time is stuck with me, the trains and bridges and row houses. And I just went back, and it all flooded back to me. I went back to see my parents at Thanksgiving, who are still living. And I realized the extent to which it colored my visual imagination. When I moved to Vermont, I was completely nonplussed. I had no idea what to do with it. I was scared to death of every noise. And it took me a while to acquire the ability to see it and appreciate it and love it. And that, it took decades. And the process for me of getting to know Vermont was a process of drawing and painting and doing prints from that. And I just want to save that thought for later, because in the final room, a number of the work I've done over 35 years, really continuously from observation in the rural landscape, is displayed there. That's been an important continuous thread in my work, as has the man-made piece of it, the industrial piece. So the river book was based on being here. It was my first kind of connection, the Connecticut River, and enduring connection to this region. From that, I did a book of bridges, which are represented. There are two right there. And at that point, I established my press. I named it Bridge Press. I had moved at that time to Bellows Falls. I was on Bridge Street. I love bridges. And the notion of a bridge is a metaphor for a collaborative process. At that point, typographers, poets, bookbinders, printmakers. There was something very interconnected about the creative process for me. So these represent the work here, not only my own work, but the collaborative involvement with other people, and in particular Chard. And I can't exactly remember the order of the books, but you can see this is not strictly chronological. My involvement with Zeppelins. Zeppelins are just hard to imagine. I mean, they were 700 feet long, so they're almost as long as an ocean liner, but they flew at about 1,000 feet over your head, and not very quickly. And it strikes me as absolutely the best way to travel. They went around 90 miles an hour, so not that quick, quicker than a train, quicker than an ocean liner, a lot lower in altitude and slower than a jet. But I just became obsessed with them, and they're just so strange. And so a number of these prints represent my involvement with Zeppelins at the time. I also became involved with steam locomotives. I was born the year the last commercial steam locomotive line ended its service. So for me, it felt like an absent presence, something that I just had missed out on, and it stuck in my imagination. So you'll see a number of the steam locomotives back in that corner. This particular image behind Andy of a biplane is an homage to my father, who is a big influence on me. He's an aviation illustrator, so mostly military airplanes. And I grew up around them, grew up around his work. I'd come home from school. He always worked at home. And so I'd come home from any school. He'd like to keep me busy, so he'd give me pencils and paints, and I'd build model airplanes. And just that habit of working with my hands, I've associated that craft with him. And he recently had brain surgery, which I'm glad to say was very successful. But he had some impairment, some neurological impairment. And he told me a story. He said that a friend had visited, and he asked his friend if she would come and sit for him. And he drew her. And he just wanted to see if he was able, he's left-handed, was able to have that manual control, if that habit would return to him. And it did, and he found it so deeply reassuring. I was really touched by that. And then he said something, he's very self-absorbed, so it surprised me. He said, "You're just like me, you just need to keep doing it, don't you?" And I said, "That's exactly right, So he got me in ways, and I talked to my son, who's a musician, about that. That necessity of continuing to work. And for me, this show, I had no idea when I saw it en masse like this that it would add up to that much, because I work on on more than one piece at a time, but one idea at a time. But it's the thing I'm most grateful for, I think, in my own life, the choice I made that I'm most grateful for, is to continue to work throughout my life. Pretty much no matter what. I can't think of many periods where I just didn't work, and it's not always been easy. But for me, that's what the show is really quite important to see. Anyway, I wonder if we can begin to move. Do you think this is a good idea? There are a lot of us. Would you rather remain where you are? Okay, we'll stay here. What I might do is briefly describe some of the other projects, and then we can talk for a little bit, and you can have a look at them. So let's just keep where we are. At some point, I discovered letterpress printing, and I bought all the equipment. It's heavy stuff, and I lugged it. I can't tell you how many times I moved within this area, more than 10. And each time, a Chard has helped me. Many times I've moved by carrying trays of type and equipment. And I became very interested in typography. I became not very good at it, and I discovered that there were people in this area along the Connecticut River Valley who were very involved in the book arts. It's a remarkable, and I mean nationally or internationally, there are remarkable practitioners of binding, typography, and I was very fortunate to meet a man named Dan Carr. I don't know if any of you knew him. He lived in Ashwelot, which is 20 miles from here, and he was a punch cutter, which goes back to the origins of printing. Just a real true genius, and we worked together on the typography of the books. I realized I wasn't going to be that good at it. I would never be as good as he was, and that my interest was primarily in designing the books and creating the images for them. So the next room over features the work that combines text and image. Sometimes a single sheet. I would print a single sheet with one etching and a poem. It's called a broadside, printed on one side only. And there's a selection of broadsides in there. Two of the pieces on display, Chard and I collaborated on. One is called Tree of Wisdom, which is in the center of the next room. And the other is called Adam and Eve's Lament. Would you read one or both of those?
Yeah.
Do you want to get it off the wall, or do you have it with you?
I don't have the Tree of Wisdom. If we could,
Do you want me to bring it over to you?
it's a big.
Kind of big.
But if you could do
We're
that,
talking
that,
about Adam and
that
Eve's
might
lament.
sure, that would be nice. That would be great. So while Petey's getting, that's a good solution.
So the broadsides are on the left. Very briefly, on the right of this next room was a book called Pierrot Lunaire. I don't know if any of you know of it. It was sort of a success scandal, 1912, Arnold Schoenberg, atonal Austrian expressionist piece of music. It's very difficult to listen to. It's very strident, atonal, angular, and difficult. And just give me 1 second to finish that thought. It had been based on a series of poems by the symbolist Belgian poet Albert Giraud, written in French, translated for the Schoenberg into German. And the German became the dominant translation into English. There was not a translation from the original French into English. So I did that. It was my one and only kind of academic achievement. So I had the help of a real French person to help me see through all the idioms. There are a lot of, it's very anti-clerical, sardonic. It's a nasty series of poems. And so the 4 images are represented in the middle room on the right. They're all from Pierrot Lunaire. You'll notice 2 prints on each page. They are from the same plate. One is printed the way an etching is printed. I'm going to be real brief about this. An etching is printed so that you, in some way, create depressions in the surface of a metal plate. You fill those depressions with ink, wipe the surface clean, and print it with high pressure. A woodcut, on the other hand, is printed by inking the surface. The depressions remain uninked. But you can print an etching plate either way. So if you see the 2 images, they are the same plate printed in those 2 different ways. And the idea is it worked with a very sudden reversals in the music, this kind of violent counterpoint that something can be positive then negative, that reversal, that back and forth, that nothing is fixed, which is a theme that I've kind of kept running throughout my work. But that's emblematic in that series of prints. Please.
That's great. Thank you. This is Adam and Eve. You can see they're not in there, in the etching there. And they were, at least there were some rough drafts, weren't there, Brian, where you did put Adam and Eve in?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you said, they shouldn't be in there. So there's this just kind of a dark wood, which is also in the Inferno, but that's not Eden. But here's the absence of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And so they both have laments. What we tried to do, tried inadvertently throughout the years, is create tension in everything we did. And we never talked to each other about collaborating. Brian said, I'm going to do a print of Adam and Eve. And I said, well, I'll write some poems. Okay. Then that would be the last we talked about it. It worked the best that way. Couldn't have worked any better than by keeping our distance and then coming together at the end. Adam's lament is they're 2 sonnets. You came the last, but were the first to learn. The coming last, you were the first in turn. A second thought of God's and dream of mine. I understand the curse of your position. I too would pray for an obvious sign. My loyalty softens as my faith conditions. You were blessed with cause. I can't object. I understand you're wanting back my dream. Your bitter syllogism is correct. I'm a man, and that's not what I seem. The only child for whom my children grieve. I would have vivified them too from dream, but they unborn and yet to be conceived came only after we had been deceived. And Eve responds, I'm granted a few last words by the oak that only listens, a few vain wishes and cigarette that I refuse to smoke. I wish my husband, the minor poet of fishes and trees, had seen the world with greater vision, had stopped to hear the ocean's legion of silent names. See how he ribbons the trees as if they were endangered women. See how he stares at what's forbidden, each flower and fruit, each orange and lemon. Why listen to a man who polishes his tongue, who never took time to listen to the cone of crashes when he wasn't present. I'm on my way to a country that can't be sung.
Just watching Chard read and looking at the broadside, it made me realize that Chard often elaborates on things that are implicit in my work. I'm often looking just for some capsule summary, some gestalt that he is able to then kind of walk you through. Again, not necessarily intertwined. We really work in parallel and not looking over our shoulders at each other. But the fact that it's worked out, I feel, quite well has been very gratifying to me. Do you want to read the Tree of Wisdom?
I do. Can we
Okay,
possibly
maybe.
bring that one in?
That's
I
a
know
big one.
It's a little larger, but I need to show it over here more.
We could bring everything from the East Gallery.
Oh,
We'll just
okay.
carry it all in, yeah.
Wow.
Bring the mountain to Muhammad, yes.
Wow.
So,
Yeah. This print is just so stunning, and I'll try to show it to
I can-
everybody
I
here.
can hold it up on
Yeah.
the,
Got it?
And I saw this tree.
why don't I just
Yeah.
sort of walk it around a little bit. So.
And I saw this tree, and it took me 5 minutes to write this, maybe 6 minutes. But I was so inspired by what Brian had done here. Tree of Wisdom, I'm taken in by its stand in breadth, marveling at its brawn and reach of branches, studying each leaf like the page of a sacred text, embracing its trunk like a void. I hear the prophecy of a lark in the density of foliage. The vision awaits its time, hastens to its end. Until this time arrives, I am content to sit and stare and climb. I'm compelled to bet my life on the fact that this is the first work of revelation, calling a tree, tree, leaves, leaves. It is the good work of a scientist. It is the hidden work of a common man. I say its name like the bird who can't stop singing, 10,000 things in one, and then this prayer, Om Mani Padme Hum, the jewel is in the world. I lie in the shade of its canopy and listen to the genius above deny her name. I turn its green to black in order to turn it back again. I watch its fruit fall in the wind like proofs for a law that only exists in the mind. Like a well-stocked house, it sustains me, cleans my lungs with a distillation. It is my home of transformation, where I remain and disappear.
Thank you. This particular print is a multiple plate etching. I had intended it as a color etching. I love color, always have loved color. Felt I had to give it up as I took up printmaking, try to return to it through that particular image. There were originally 4 plates intended to be printed in different colors. I printed them all in black, just superimposed on each other, and never returned to color printmaking after that. So, I'll talk a little bit about the following room. The center on the left of the following room, I did a children's book with my former wife, and we started it right around 2000, and by life imitating art, we also conceived of a child around that time. He's 20 years old now, our son David. It was really fun to do a children's book. I want to talk a little bit more about technique. I mentioned earlier that there are 2 ways to print an etching plate. There's the usual way, where the depressions are inked and the surface is wiped clean, or the relief method, where the surface is inked and the depressions remain uninked, or the color of the paper. That latter technique is what I used for the bird book, which is a children's book, and Holiday Eames, my then wife, wrote rhyming couplets for each bird. I was telling my friends who are birders that I originally started to create it in the model of a reading primer from the 19th century, and it's printed in 19th century wood type, and it had that archaic feeling to it. And I wanted it to be about New England birds, but I couldn't find a bird for each of the letters of the alphabet. Then I turned to North America, and I couldn't do that either. So I ended up with an umbrella bird, which is an Amazonian exotic species, and a number of others. But it was ultimately, I don't think she's here tonight, but Dee Dee Cummings, it ended up, she redesigned the book, which was the appropriate thing to do, kind of modernized it, and it was the first publication of Green Writers Press. Bless her heart, about 12 years ago, so that was, she got it out there. So you can get it for $19.95 on Amazon if you like. Moving along, I gotta take a little peek what's back there.
Brian,
Yes.
do you want me to bring some more work out?
I just need to know what's back there. I forgot. So I'll talk about what I can see.
Wonderful thing.
Thank you. Okay, I was going to end up with the emblems. If you look straight back, you can probably see it from here. There are 7 images, and they're based on tarot cards. And I did some reading, some research about the tarot, and I learned that what we think of it as something related to prognostication, its history was not like that at all. And I'm very involved in the history of printmaking. For one thing, it's not that old. Printmaking's been around in the West for about 600 years. Among the earliest etchings and engravings that were ever made were tarot cards. They didn't mean what they mean to us now. They represented a word we don't see very much more anymore called cosmography, which is a visual representation of the universe. And it's a bit of a foreign notion, but it's embedded in Western thought. And it was kind of an obsessive theme for early printmaking and a recurrent theme throughout printmaking. So among the original prints ever made, intaglio prints, etchings and engravings, were tarot cards and playing cards. The tarot cards representing the order of the universe. And I like that idea that you could somehow embody something so enormous and so abstract in concrete representations. So I stepped into that format. I took the major arcana, slightly adapted, and created a card, an etching for each of the major arcana. So the text is the titles of the cards, and you can see them back there. There's an order to it which has its own meaning, and it represents a kind of a spiritual journey, returning to the world, beginning in innocence and naivete and ignorance, and ending with knowledge and understanding and insight, but back where you started from. And I like that idea. So there's a determined order to the cards in that deck. And I think there are 22 major arcana, and starting with number 0, which is the Fool. And I took that as an opportunity to do a self-portrait. So it's not on display, but the Fool is open, in kind of a divine Fool, open in a way that it will enable him or her to go through that whole journey, through that learning, through that understanding, through that insight. On the far right, you can just barely see them, are a series of emblems. And emblems were, in the 16th and 17th century, allegorical books. They were actually their version of how-to books for moral improvement. And they would start with an often very quizzical single image. And they often come across as quite surreal, detached images. And you're not sure what you're looking at. And they're meant to prompt kind of a moment of moral understanding. Now, to leave nothing to doubt, they have captions in Latin. That helps you, that orients you. And then there's a lengthy explication. So it tells you exactly what you're supposed to learn from that image. The idea is that it's a book of visually contemplative images that you take time looking at. This coincided with a time I was moving around a lot. It helped me to work very small. They're all 5 by 5 inch squares. And I intended it to become a book. It never did, though I did attach Latin inscriptions with each of the images. And I think they're on the labels there. Remind me, Petey, did they end up there? Yes, thank you. So the idea is you look at the image, you don't know what to make of it. You have your own association with it, your own connection with it. It may be something, they are, in fact, in each case, something very familiar. And then you read the Latin, and it's going to kind of either reinforce or undermine or play with your understanding. But in that sort of echoing back between the words and the image, take some time and just sort of see what you see and what you think. So they're intended to have that kind of personal, direct relationship, that challenge. And I hope you'll do that and take some time. I just want to mention, there's something a little bit odd about framing prints and putting them on the wall, especially as I've talked about, they come from a context where they're in books. They're bound together. They're also meant to be seen so that you hold them directly in front of you. And they've always been used that way. They've almost always been smaller than paintings and intended for private consumption. I love that aspect of the contemplative, that you'll take time with an image, that you'll just sit with it. And having them just behind glass takes a little away from that, but you can get by it. I hope you'll spend some time with the images. I wanted to return to the work I've done from observation. I grew up drawing things that I was looking at. It's not that I didn't have an imagination. It's just, the world's a lot more interesting than my imagination. And I'd say in the 1980s, I mentioned earlier, it was my way to acquaint myself, to create a connection with the natural world in New England. And starting in the late 80s and continuing until very recently, I would spend a good deal of time outside, sitting in the landscape, painting the watercolors, several of which appear in the far room on the right, and doing dry points. Now, an etching, there are 3 steps. There's the drawing of the plate, the etching of the plate, and by etching I mean there's the interaction of the chemistry of acid with the metal. Acid corrodes the metal and creates the depressions in the plate. And then there's the printing, so there are 3 steps. When you do a dry point, you're not doing anything with chemicals. You're working directly on a piece of metal with a sharp tool, creating a burr, which is a kind of a rough ridge of metal that snags the ink. It often creates a very soft, smoky, sort of charcoal mark. And it was my stand-in for drawing for years. And I still do that. So I'd grab a metal plate whenever I traveled, or even at home. I'd go out, I'd sit in the landscape for an hour or so. One wonderful quality of dry point, you can't see what you're doing at all. You're not making dark marks. You're making ridges, which are the same color as the metal. And so you have no idea what you're doing. And I tend to be somewhat self-critical when I can see what I'm doing. And printmaking, and especially dry point, has given me that delay. I can't worry about it until it's printed. At that point, it's kind of too late anyway. And sometimes it's a pleasant surprise. Sometimes it's really quite different from what you expect. And that indirection, that sense that there are all these steps that you can't fully control, appealed to me about printmaking. So the dry points have that sense of spontaneity, of immediacy. They represent my momentary engagement with the natural world, but a continuous practice of mine for several decades now. I've recently, I think I mentioned, just returned to drawing and painting. I've put aside printmaking. It was a long chapter represented here. And I've returned to painting in oils, and I've completely forgotten how to do it. I used to do it with second nature. I was quite adept at it. Gone. I have no idea what I'm doing. And there's something so refreshingly open-ended about that. I go up in my studio. I forget all my worldly problems, and the only problems I have when I'm painting are the problems of painting. And if any painter knows exactly what I'm talking about. And it's kind of liberating. It's like the old bumper sticker, a bad day of fishing is better than a good day at work. You struggle with it, but it's so intrinsic to the challenges of painting. And I find it, Petey and I were talking, I said, painting's a lot harder than printmaking, and she agreed. And there's something about that I find right now exactly what I need to be doing. And I'm not working in thematic terms. There aren't sort of grand projects that, okay, this is a big deal, I need to bring this to a conclusion. It's very open-ended for me and very liberating. So that's what I've been doing the past couple years. And I don't have any more to say. I'd love to take any of your questions and thoughts at this point. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about dry point, which I've never tried, but it's intriguing to me. Would you say that it allows you to be gestural more than other mediums?
Yes, it definitely can be. It's very revealing of the pressure and movement of your hand. It magnifies those autographic qualities. So absolutely. So a dark mark, you just press a lot harder, makes a very dark mark. If you press very faintly, you get a very fine, like a fine pencil line. So kind of an extreme magnification of your hand.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And can you do something fast, or is the metal too resistant?
It's resistant. It doesn't feel like drawing with a pencil. You have to actually be in the metal. You can't skate over it, so you need a very sharp tool. And once you're in the metal and you get a feeling for what that is like, then you're okay. But you have to be in the metal to make any mark that's legible. But I recommend it. And it skips all the chemicals. When I moved to Maine, I just gave away all my, they're downstairs, as a matter of fact, in the print shop down there. And it worked in dry point and mezzotint, which is a way of actually darkening the plate and lightening areas. Engraving, which is really the earliest intaglio technique. There aren't that many people who, I'm not bragging, who can do it. It's a lot of fun. I don't do it very well, but I like doing it. And other manual techniques. So that's what I had been doing once I gave up working with acids. Nancy.
Yeah, I'm curious about the difference for you when you're working between painting and printmaking, because I know you had a habit of revisiting plates and reworking them over the years. So
Yeah.
how does it feel oil painting? When do you know you're done?
That's a great question. It's a very apt question. I have no idea. And I'm working now. I started painting in oils about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm still working on those paintings, and they're quite small. It's not like it's an ambitious tableau that's taking me many years. They're just quite modest. And I have about 50 of them laying around on the floor of my studio. And unfortunately, they're catching cat hairs, and my dryer vents into my studio, which keeps it warm, but it's filled with fluff. So they got a lot of stuff in them. But I have no idea. And I'm asking myself that question now. It's a very timely question. And it's very hard to tell. I don't know the answer yet. I feel like I'm gaining on it, but I don't know when I'll get there. I hope I do know when I get there. But, yeah.
Another question about dry point.
Yeah.
One, you said something interesting about, because it doesn't contrast so sharply, what you're doing when you're doing the dry point, it's hard, it's all in your imagination, in the sense that you see less of what's actually happening with there.
Right.
If I remember right about dry point, another aspect of that is that because of the burr, the successive printing actually deforms the burr.
Yeah.
So not only do you not see what's there initially, but it's what's going to come in the future is going to be a slightly different painting too.
That's right, yeah.
Is that part of the aspect?
That's accurate what you said. The dry points, you'll notice there's a concept of an addition, and that's the number in the lower left. There's a numerator, which is a single number, and a denominator, which is the total prints in the addition. Addition are prints that just all look alike and are from the same state. So you'll notice a small number of the dry points because they do deteriorate pretty quickly. You can actually feel them. You can't see them very well, but you can feel the burr. Could I take a moment and just, I forgot what was on the immediate right as you walk into the third room. It just came back to me. I was thinking about music. And I want to, first of all, acknowledge my music teacher who is here tonight, has been a big part of my life, Peggy Spencer. And if I had been given any choice about it, I would have been a musician, but it was not to be. I have no talent. But I worked fairly hard under her tutelage, and I have to say some of the happiest moments of my life were playing in a string quartet with Peggy in recent years. And a little anecdote, some of you know I've been sick, and I was diagnosed about 2.5 years ago with acute myeloid leukemia. And I was up at Dartmouth getting tests, and they told me the news, and you all dream of, like, when you're told you have this nasty illness. And my first reaction was, they said, you're very sick and you have to stay here. I said, no, I can't. My quartet is rehearsing this afternoon. So, and the week before was the last time I played, and it was just a perfect time for me to put that away. I found in life some things, they're over, and if they're over in a good time, that's kind of a blessing. That's a really good thing. But Peggy's brought me a great deal of joy with all that she's taught me and all that we've worked together. I bring this up because the Pierrot Lunaire is related to a piece of music, and I did a book called Winterreise, based on a series of songs by Franz Schubert. That's on the right as you walk in. They're nocturnal, despairing. It's bleak. If you've ever heard the song cycle, approach it with caution. It's about, I think it's about 70 minutes, and it's just absolutely harrowing. But it's extraordinarily beautiful, powerful music. And unlike the Pierrot Lunaire, which is borderline unlistenable, the Winterreise, it just gets in your head. And I listened to it again and again. And it helped me sublimate my bad attitude about winter. I thought moving to Maine, I'd get away from it. It's just windier and wetter there, but it's no warmer. But I did want to acknowledge Peggy and how much music has meant to me. And that it's been not only the written word that I've collaborated with, but music as well. Any other questions? Sue?
Yeah, have you thought about going back to pastels at all? Because you used to do some lovely work in pastels.
2 days ago, I bought a set of pastels. So the first time since Sue and I had art classes in junior high school together. So the first time in 50-some years, I've returned to pastel. And I'm combining it with painting, which it does very nicely. One artist, I look at a lot of art, and I always have one artist I admire a great deal for his landscapes is Edgar Degas. And you don't think of landscapes, you think of ballerinas. But his landscapes are wonderful, and he would combine pastel and oil paint. Yeah, David.
Could you talk a little bit about your series of Beethoven heads, speaking of music? Because you have a book I saw on the show. How did that come about? What was your thinking? And what are you trying to do in that series?
Sure. This was the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth, I think was in 2020. And Seth Knopp, who's the artistic director of Yellow Barn Music Festival, approached a group of artists, 5 of us living in this area, Barbara Garber, Gordon Hayward, Rachel Portese, and Nancy Starrow, and just challenged us with, who is this person, Beethoven? And, I love his music. I found him somewhat unapproachable, and I didn't know how to get away to him. He's too big. And he's also become somewhat, not his music, but his persona, something of a cliche. He's easily represented symbolically, but I wanted some way to get closer to him, and I discovered a sculptor whose name I'm now forgetting, who was a late 19th century contemporary of Rodin, teacher of Giacometti and Matisse. It'll come back to me, I promise you. And he went nuts on Beethoven. He did a series of busts of Beethoven. And I found a French book of photographs of them, and I just kind of went to town on that. So most of those drawings, I did about 75 pretty big drawings of Beethoven's head, are based on photographs of the sculpture by, it'll come back to me when it's too late. Yeah. Jonathan.
It seems like much of your work, once you have made it, in your collaboration with Chard, you then take it to Chard and he responds with his poetry. Has there ever been an opportunity where you've done the reverse, where Chard has created a poem and brought it to you?
No, never. But you reminded me of something. I thank you for it. There's a series of animals. Chard and I, our most recent project called Bestiary is our most recent and probably our most extensive collaboration. There are 36 poems and 36 etchings. And we've been working on that. We had done a book together called What the Animals Teach Us in 1995. And so we had done a bestiary together. We love animals, each in our own individual way. And we returned to that about 5 years ago. And we were about, probably 2/3 of the way through the project when I got sick. And things were touch and go for a little bit. So I actually, a close friend of mine, she's not here tonight, a wonderful etcher, Bryony Morrow, I don't know if you know her. I said, Bryony, if it doesn't work out, I want you to finish this project. So I made sure she had a key to my studio, and she actually kept the project, printed some of the plates, and sent photographs of them to me in the hospital so I could continue to think about it. And it was a wonderful thing to do. I got out of the hospital, and we continued the project. This was not intended as an artist's book. I can't do that anymore for a variety of reasons, but we intended it as an art book. So a trade book, it's produced in an edition of 500 copies, so a limited edition, but nonetheless printed offset, commercially printed. And in that case, there was, I think, more back and forth. Chard would pretty much every day send me a new manuscript. And I mean, as if I was going to read all 36 poems again when he changed a couple words. I think he needed to do it for his own record-keeping purposes. But he kept me apprised of what he was doing, and I would send him some JPEGs of what the animals look like. So there was more, I think, more interconnection in the process of creating that book than there had been in previous books.
Yeah, question more for Chard, but obviously, as it relates to Brian's work, with your divinity degree, here in poems you read tonight, a lot of allusions to Christianity and Judeo-Christian traditions. And would you agree that a lot of what you've written for Brian's work comes out of that? And if so, was that also limiting? Were there some of Brian's topics that go beyond, go different places that?
That's an interesting question. It was really a happy accident in many ways. When Brian asked me to collaborate with him on the Inferno, of course, there are all those, religious themes there that, and I had studied the Inferno in divinity school. But the more we collaborated, the less those themes cropped up. For instance, this book and What the Animals Teach Us, there's just a series of animals. How many are in here, Brian? 31?
36.
36. Here's a sloth, for instance.
Do you want to read something from that?
I won't take up too much.
I don't want to keep you all too long, but maybe just one more.
Do you have one that you think that should be?
You've got a few marked there. I like grouse.
You like grouse?
Yeah.
I'll read grouse because I'm very, very attached to it. I had a pet grouse for 5 years named Randy.
To be clear, this is a wild grouse. This is not like a caged grouse, but this bird attached himself to Chard. Most remarkable thing.
Yeah, page 60, and just came out of the woods one day and sat down beside me when I was raking leaves, and hopped on my knee. There's a picture of him, or Brian's picture of him. I have a picture of him on my phone. I can show you later if you want to see him. But he, I would walk down to the garden. He'd come running out of the woods and follow me down to the garden. And when we'd plant, he'd peck the back of my wife Liz's hands, and it was just amazing. For 5 years, John knows all about him, John Jessup, because he was working on our house at the time, and he used to terrify his workers. Grouse, whomp, whomp. In the meadow, a grouse drummed out his call like a mower just starting up, but never catching. Slow, percussive beats at first that quickened before they stopped, and then the silence in which the moment hung for him, charging the air with a strange, unlikely sound that was also a song. I heard that beat and knew my heart was home to the grouse inside the grass of the uncut meadow, pumping the air as if it were blood.
I love that. Yeah.
So
this book is just, I think, a little bit more playful than most of our collaborations, and
these prints are just really gorgeous. Here's a hermit thrush, which is the state bird. You probably all know that, the Vermont state bird. Maybe I'll just read one more here, and this may be a good one to end with because it's a little dark now, but the hermit thrush sings in the evening. The hermit thrush is set for 6 to sing his song as if it were the end of the world, and he was stirred by dusk to sing the same sweet song again and again in the understory, as if to say, it's neither words nor meaning that matter in the end, but the quality of sound, as if we were deafened by the sun and needed his song as a key to unlock our ears, to hear and understand, to see and see, knowing that this one day is the end for now, which it is. It is, he claims, with a song just loud enough to pierce the woods until the night descends like 1,000 veils, and then just one.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That seems a good note to end on. Thank you all so much. I hope you'll stick around and see the show, and I'll be here. I'm happy to talk to you. I'd love to see you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.